The colonial aims to have power over the islands and to spread Christianity, in other words, the conversion of the natives to Christianity, which are emphasized by the crown in their expedition for the search of spices and other resources, which started in 1521. When Magellan has arrived in the Philippines, there are various events that they faced. One of these is the celebration of the Mass in Limasawa or Butuan in Cebu, where Raha Humabon and his people was affected, and as well as the conversion of King Tupas niece. It was followed by the uh, Muslim interpreter King Tupas and his son, which played a great role in conversion to Christianization, and thus the Spanish has taken control and propagate the Christianity in the Muslim stronghold as well as in their fortress in Manila with the help of the converted Cebuanos in different places and areas and islands, including the hinterlands. Evangelism is done by different religions and orders promotes the pacification among them. King Philip II is the first monarch that boasted that the sun never rise or set in his empire, because when the sun rose in Madrid, it was still early afternoon of the preceding day in Manila, and it was emphasized that the Philippines was a link of the Spanish imperial and had placed in the Spanish imperial design Oriental Empire and would extend their conquest to northern Japan, North Japan, and in China as well. The main idea of their imperial conquest and expansion was for them to obtain resources and people which would bring them benefits in many ways, for them to have power to places they occupy. In the Treaty of Zaragoza, signed in 1529, the Philippines has become part of the Portuguese territorial, but still the Spanish are showing their interest to acquire the Philippines explicitly. King Charles of Spain accepts 350,000 gold ducats in exchange to relinquishing the rights for in claiming the Philippines. Despite the expedition under Ruy Lopez de Villalobos from Mexico in 1542, it clearly shows their determination to acquire and occupy the islands, the Philippines, despite the Treaty of Zaragoza, knowing that the Portugal has the right over the Philippines. Fray Andres de Ordaneta believes that the Spanish shall contravene or oppose in such a treaty, and that the reason behind ignoring the Portugal right over the islands is because of the transaction or the expedition for the search of spices must go on, and it was stressed by the King Charles to Magellan that upon their voyage around the world, the search for spices and islands in ocean sea are theirs, and they must have a power or control over that islands and resources and a political, economic, and cultural aspect in this administration to have and wealth and as well as status exclusively for the Spaniards, promoting their colonial system for their own benefits for the Spanish uh, only. The Spanish colonials wants powers as well as in economics, which would definitely benefit them, and they covers into the components of the national economy, which is represented by income or benefit derived from the lands, trades, and commerce, with which encourages also the uh, oppression in the native side, and they were abused as well as taken advantage in their own lands and ignorance. Encomiendas, haciendas, taxation, monopolies, galleon trade, and polo Polo e-servicios, or the forced labor, are the institutions that became the homework of Spanish colonialism. Encomienda is a grant to the Spaniards of a piece of land with the inhabitants in it up to two or three generations, and the natives become their workers, and then encomenderos take advantage to them for their personal benefits, which the purpose of encomenda is to contribute to the colony, which are being enjoyed by the Spaniards. But due to too much greed, they are being too much and blinded by powers and corruption. Almost all the Spaniards has been granted encomiendas, even the religious corporations like the Augustinians, Franciscans, Dominicans, and Jesuits were also uh, tempted to take advantage of the natives, showing more of their greed, the profit, and pocketing more money through using their powers in this and that the religious corporations are one of the most powerful person that holds power as well. The abolition of the encomienda system did not affect the power that the religious corporation had, and they actually made it more beneficial for them through purchasing or donations in their lands or renting it and making it a temporalities. Haciendas become the hallmark feature of agrarian development in the archipelago, and the religious institutions are mainly the focus. This made the native to be radical to the Spanish rule. The monopoly in domestic economy and to the people are not really beneficial to them, since the colonial state had taken control over the economic ventures and the need for revenues. Wine, battle knot, playing cards, and tobaccos are very important in the society, like the wines which are mostly used in ceremonies because the ceremonies cannot be completed without the presence or the use of wine. The blood compact between Sikatona and Legazpi in 1565 or between Suleiman and Goiti in 1570 has no wine. The blood compact is also used in the native relations and as well as in foreign diplomacy. In other words, it is the way of building political powers between the people and other country. In 1807, indicated how the government controls the local wine industry that was received by the Ilocos people. It is also the same case in the uprising in late 18th and early 19th century in northern Luzon, which the monopoly of tobacco was very effective and zealously through the Royal Company of the Philippines. Galleon trade during the period over 2 centuries has shown progress as everyone who wants to trade has the freedom to trade, as the archipelago was open to all traders from China, India, and Southeast Asia, which shown a dynamic interaction between the people and the Chinese traders and natives in Luzon and Visayas shows and displayed trust doing their transaction through bartering. Manila in the Philippines and Acapulco in Mexico are the only two ports that are being used in the monopolistic foreign trade by the Spain. This also destroyed and interrupted the external trade and commerce of the Philippines. And it was done by limiting the trade, but they make it into through one port, or they can only use this when trading and it for them to have an easy and effective collection of juice from foreign trade. And before you can invest nor trade, to uh, you must have boletas and natives works that they can render are through um, strength or labor works only, like an oarsman, which refers to the occupation as a rower of a boat and other physical strengths, and that the investments was monopolized by the Spaniards. Taxation in the is the inherent right of the government, and this was used for the well-being of the people and the government and also, but this part was what is lacking in the Spanish system of taxation, the reciprocity and mutuality of the citizens or the people in there itself. This colonial taxation destroyed economic integrity of native leadership because there are changes of how it used to be where the colonial demanded more tributes and dues in the natives, which results to almost no improvement nor improvements in the native conditions. Then the local chieftain or leaders become just a collector and was excluded from the benefits that they must also have. The Spaniards demanded more than what the natives are capable of giving, and thus the breakdown of morality and unjust imposition of taxes mainly for the benefits of the Spaniards are observed. Thus it threatens and destroy the local leadership uh, based on their authorities they had been enjoying before. The natives are forced to work for the Spaniards, which also lead to free labor that when you are Spanish and has the wealth, then you can be exempted in or rendering services or work. But since the people in the Philippines are not a Spanish but an Indios with a brown color, they are taking advantage of their ignorance and vulnerability and making them work for free and almost no compensation at all for their services rendered. All this, the road building, ship building, and galleon trade laborers are notorious for many inhuman treatment, deaths, and breakup of families, and as well as an untold sufferings. Natives try to escape from the colony of Spanish because they are too much, and some succeeded in escaping the Philippines and just stay in the places they had escaped to. The natives in the Cavite arsenal had been in a tight spot as they had to bear the rigor and pains of ferrying logs to Laguna to Cavite, and a native woman rendered personal and domestic services in the Spanish homes. In other places like the convents, which also promotes abuses and unwanted pregnancy, and even the Spaniards, who called themselves men of God, committed immoral acts reported by Solidaridad. That's all. Thank you.
Good day, sir. My name is Santiago Sultan, Bed 2. Number 3, political setup. Colonialism needed a kind of power arrangement that would allow the realization of colonial ends, a degree of native participation without per-colonial dominance. The reorganization, therefore, of the political structure follow a dualistic hierarchical pattern along Spanish and native lines but devoid of the political mobility from bottom up. Thus, the colonial structure consisted of a barrier, bureaucracy with appreciate linkage between the home government and the colony and structure of authority in the colony that ensure the exercise of authority by the Spaniards and the performance of responsibilities by the natives. Example of political system: input, demands and support, output, decision and action. Example of political structure: democracy is a political system where the government is ruled either directly by the people or through elected officials who present them. The most common example of democracy are the United States, Canada, Germany, and many others European nations. Those spin put up what political scientist turned historian O.D. Corpus called the bureaucracy. This consisted of a political hierarchy that brought the home government and the colony into a relationship in which the exploitation of colonials become not only necessary but also normal and in fact to a certain extent moral. The highest and first level was authority of the crown in colonial affairs. This was expressed in a series of bureaucratic mechanisms the council affairs. Below this council was the Ministry of the Ultramar, which performed the function of dealing with the colony. But the geographic distance between Spain and the Philippines made direct administration meaningless and the direct rule through the viceroyalty of Mexico. The second administration was prepared by those provincial officials called alcaldes in the case of the pacifying an organized unit called alcaldes and therefore administered through military commanders. As head of alcalde, the alcalde mayor exercised executive as well as judicial powers. To these powers was added the Indulto de Comercio, which granted to the alcalde the right and privilege to engage commerce. The third and last level of bureaucracy was the municipal units, which was presented by a dichotomy of political leadership, consisting of Spanish, Cora, Paracu, Win exercised all the powers of government in the municipal level and the Gaberdolilos, Gaberdosilos and Gavizas de Barangay who only implemented colonial policies and measures sometimes against their own interests. Consequently, what developed was a kind of union political and religious power which the propagandist Marcel Luis del Pilar called the Lucracia in effect, while the natives had participation in the bureaucracy. It was limited to the exercise of responsibility, not authority or power, since colonial ends required the effective collection of tribute and other dues from the natives. How the religious performed this role from the native point of view was summed up in the writings of the Filipinos propagandists like Jus Burgos, Manifesto and La Lobre Negra, Graciano Lopez, China's Freebottom, Gregorio Santiago's El Progreso de Filipinas, Marcelo S. del Pilar, La Soberania Monacal and Dasalan at Toksuhan and whose Rizal Nuli Mitangere and El Filibusterismo. In effect, the colonial system allowed the natives to preserve their ancient political structure simply because the Spaniards found its preservation and use effective in collection of tributes and suppressing one group of natives by another under policy of divide and rule. Conversely, the native leadership, although symbolically supporting the mechanism of colonial rule, continued to provide the main line of resistance that would later erupt into movement to undermine colonial rule and ultimately to overthrow it. That's all. Thank you.
Good day and God bless your Ismar. By the way, I am Iris Jane B. Paragoso, one of the reporters from Group 5. So for today's discussion, I will be going to tackle about the assigned topic to me, which are the sociocultural patterns together with the one of the native responses, which is the Indio response. But first and foremost, I will be going to first discuss to all of you the sociocultural patterns. So, ang sociocultural patterns ay ito ay ang pagpapakita ng pagpapasailalim at paghihiwalay ng mga katutubo base sa benepisyo ng katayuan. Dahil kapag ikaw ay nasa mataas at kapag ikaw ay nasa mataas, so basically ikaw ay igagalang. Pero kapag ikaw ay nasa may baba, hindi ka igagalang. So the sociocultural patterns, ito ay ang paghihiwalay ng mga katutubo base sa benepisyo ng katayuan. So nakafocus ito sa katayuan ng tao. Na siyang ibig sabihin ng pag-unlad ng sociocultural patterns. Kaya, ang pre-colonial na organisasyong panlipunan ay hindi nagbabago. So, next we have the chieftains, freemen, serfs, and slaves remained as they were as far as relations within native society were concerned. So, mananatili sila kung ano ang mayroon o relasyon nila sa native society or sa katutubong lipunan. Pero kapag mayroon silang kaugnayan sa ibang mga sektor na labas sa kanilang sarili, ang mga patakaran at pamantayan ay nagbabago. So, halimbawa nito, kung ikaw ay isang pinuno o shifting sa particular na lipunan, marahil bilang isang pinuno, ikaw ay makakaharap ng mga patakarang bago mo palang masilayan, lalo na't ikaw ay baguhan pa lamang. So, additionally, ang halimbawa dito, in today's generation, in today's situation, kung ikaw ay isang OFW, so, kapag tayo ay pupunta ng bansa upang maghanap ng trabaho, basically, hindi natin maiiwasan na tayo ay makaharap ng mga iba't ibang patakaran or mga bagong patakaran na ating masisilayan dahil tayo ay pupunta sa ibang bansa which are there are different rules and regulations. So, sa madaling salita, ang ginawa ng kolonyalismo sa estrukturang panlipunan ay ang pagpapatong sa isang kolonyal na antas na binubuo ng mga Espanyol na ang kaugnayan sa mga katutubo ay nakabatay sa superior-inferior. So, superior-inferior means ang superior means ito ay mataas at ang inferior means ay mababa. Just like what I said lately, na ito ay nakabase sa katayuan ng tao. Kung ikaw ay mababa or kung ikaw ay nasa mataas or ikaw ay nasa mababa. And ito ay nakabatay rin sa civilized primitive stereotype. So, ang primitive means that ito yung mga taong walang estado na pinamamahalaan. Unlike sa civilized, ito ay tumutukoy sa mga namumuhay sa loob ng mga estado at pinamamahalaan ng mga batas. So, meron ako ipapakitang halimbawa ng chieftains, freemen, serfs, and slaves. So, ito yung nakuha kong mga larawan ng chieftains or Igorot chieftain, the ancient Filipino freemen, yung mga malayang tao. Then, the serf and slaves, which we all know that the serf and slaves are having the same purpose. So, next we have, regardless of ranks or status in the native structure, the Dato, Timawa, and the Alipin or Uripon were just regarded as one class level, the lowest, in the colonial society, not entitled to any social importance and rights except to serve those above them. So, ano man ang katayuan ng katubong istruktura ng Dato, Timawa, at Alipin o Uripon ay tinuturing lamang bilang isang antas na uri, which is pinaka mababa sa kolonyal. Kaya, kung ikaw ay nasa pinakamababa, ikaw ay hindi igagalang. Pero kahit na ikaw ay dato o timawa, pero kapag ikaw ay nasa mataas, basically, igagalang ka ng mga tao sa lipunan. So, the effects of the Spanish social stratification was consciously extended from the local to the national society based upon racial and religious factors. This means that ang epekto ng Spanish social stratification ay pinalawak mula sa lokal hanggang sa national na or sa pambansang lipunan batay sa lahi at sa relihiyon. So, this means nga sila ay nakabase, ito ay nakabase sa lahi at sa relihiyon ng bawat kasapi ng tao sa lipunan. At ito ay nahahati sa termino na Indios, Moros, and Infiels. So, the terms Indios, Moros, and Infiels divided the entire Philippine archipelago into three national societies definitely beneficial to the Spaniards. So, just like what I said, that lahat ito sa tatlo, which are the Indios, Moros, and Infiels. Next, we have the effect. The Indios or Christianized were allowed certain status, although below the Spanish, higher than that Moros and Infiels who were regarded as the lowest. So, ang ibig sabihin nito, ang Indio o mga Kristiyano ay pinahihintulutan ang ilang mga katayuan, bagamat mas mababa sa Espanyol, pero ang Kristiyano o Indio ay mas mataas pa sa Moros o Infiels. So, itinuturing na pinakamababa. Ang itinuturing na pinakamababa, ito ay ang Moros and Infiels. Sa katunayan, ang mga huling grupo ay nagpapakita kung gaano sila pinagkaitan, kinutya at sinisiil dahil sa kanilang relihiyong tradisyon. Kaya masasabi natin kung bakit nasa mababa ang Moros and Infiels dahil alam natin na ang mga Indios o Kristiyano ay pinahintulutan sila. Sila ay para matatawag sila na mas mataas kaysa sa dalawa. So kaya maituturing ang Moros and Infiels were regarded as the lowest dahil sila ay pinagkaitan, kinutya at sinisiil dahil sa kanilang relihiyong tradisyon. Kasi ang tatlong ang the Indios, Moros, and Infiels ay may iba't ibang tradisyon Pero ang Indio at ang Indios or ang Kristiyano ay may magandang tradisyon, which is sila lamang ang pinahintulutan ng ilang katayuan. Pero sila ay kanang mas mababa sa Espanyol, but sila rin ang Indios at Kristiyano rin ang mas mataas kaysa sa Moros at Infiels. What emerged from the colonial social system was a kind of cultural development that followed three parallel patterns: the Christian, Muslim, and the indigenous society. So, ito ay related lamang sa Moros, Indios as well as the Infiels. So, ang sistemang panlipunan lumalabas ay isang uri ng kultural na pag-unlad, which are the Kristiyano, Muslim at ang mga katutubong lipunan. Ang Kristiyano, Muslim at ang katutubong lipunan, ang kanilang lumang tradisyon ay napanatili. Unti-unting nabuo ng mga Kristiyano ang isang uri ng kultural. Dahil nga, ang mga Kristiyano ay pinahihintulutan. Kaya ang mga Kristiyano ay may unti-unting nabubuong isang uri ng kultural. So, lastly, at the end of the Spanish rule, 1898, the Filipino national culture was basically and mainly associated with the pro-Spanish culture development by the Christian societies throughout the archipelago. So, after ng pamamahala ng Kastila noong 1898, binuo ng mga Kristiyanong lipunan sa buong kapuluan ng pambansang kulturang Pilipino na pangunahing naugnay sa isang Espanyol na kultura. Sa kabilang banda, ang cultural pattern ng Muslim at other minorities ay nanatiling hindi nagbabago sa pangkalahatan. Gayunpaman, ang mga Espanyol na kumbertihin sila dahil lamang sa nilalabanan o iniwasan nila ang pagbabago ng kanilang reliyon o paniniwala. Kasi masasabi natin na ang Muslim ay mayroong paniniwala na hindi natin bilang isang Christian ay hindi natin sila kayang pilitin kung kanila bang baguhin ang kanilang tradisyon o paniniwala. Kaya ang Moros and the Muslim or the other minorities ay walang pagbabagong nagaganap. Next report that I will be going to tackle, we have the native responses. So, during the entire period of Spanish rule, native responses were related to the three kinds of societies or communities that develop. The responses were influenced by the extent of Christianization and exploitation. Dito malalaman natin ang mga tugon ng bawat lipunan na impluwensyahan ng lawak ng Kristyanisasyon at pagsasamantala. But I will be going to focus only on the Indio response o ang tugon ng Indio. So, expectedly, the Christian community, dahil sa pakipag-ugnayan sa mga colonizer, ay nagpapakita ng dalawang uri ng saloobin ng kolonyalismo. So, one was the willingness to assimilate what was necessary to acquiring benefits from the system. So, ang pagpayag na asimilahin o asimilahin o matutuhan kung ano ang kinakailangan para sa pagkuha ng mga benepisyo mula sa sistema. So, since religious change was important, the endeavor that practiced the symbolic and outward requirements of Christianity by adherence or prescribed rituals or sacraments of the church, even if the performance of such formalism entailed physical and financial sacrifices a large extent and moral compromises. So dahil mahalaga ang pagbabago ng relihiyon, sinikap ng mga Indiyon isagawa ang simboliko at panlabas ng mga pangangailangan ng Kristyanismo sa pamamagitan ng pagsunod ng mga itinakdang rituals o sakramento ng simbahan. So like for example, tayo as a Christian, so meron tayong 7 sacraments na aking nalalaman. So which are the bunyag, kumpirma, Eucharistia, pakikig-uli, anointing of the sick, communion, and holy order. So I already faced this bunyag, kumpirma, and kumpirma. So that's are the 7 sacraments I know as a Christian. So indigenous religious and Christianity blended in a folk Christian synthesis. By the end of the 19th century, Filipino religious tradition have become both native and colonial. So pinaghalo. So from the word itself, blended. So pinaghalo ang relihiyong Kristyanismo sa folk sa folk Christian synthesis. So by the end of the 19th century, Filipino religious tradition have become both native and colonial. So dahil pinagsama ang relihiyon ng Christianity sa katutubong Christian synthesis, so nagiging both native and colonial ang Filipino religious tradition. So, it was blending of East and West in the Filipino that prompted him to regard the centuries of repression as a problem that could be solved through assimilation of the Philippines as a province of Spain or separation from Spanish rule, not necessarily from Spanish civilization. So, ito ay isang paghahalo ng silangan at kultura sa Filipino, which is ang mga siglo ay tinuturing na isang problema na malutas lamang sa pamamagitan ng asimilasyon ng Pilipinas bilang lalawigan ng Espanya o ang paghihiwalay sa pamumuno ng Espanyol So, ang asimilasyon ng Pilipinas bilang isang lalawigan sa Espanya, ito ay ang mga pangunahing paraan kung paano malutas ang mga siglo o problema. So, sa dalawa, it could be done as choices kung paano nila ito malulutas ang klaseng problema na sa siglo na ituturing na isang problema. So the first was expressed by the propaganda movement 1872 to 1892, which sought the reform of the colony through the expulsion of the friars, the representation of the Philippines, the Spanish Cortes, and the institution of specific reform. So, ang kilusang propaganda noong 1872 to 1892 ay naghahangad ng reforma ng kolonya sa pamamagitan ng pagpapatalsik sa mga praile. Sa kilusang ito ang isinigawa ng Espanya at Pilipinas. So, in this year 1872 at 1892. Ang kilusang propaganda ay naghahangad ng reforma ng kolonya sa pamagitan ng pagtatalsik sa mga praile. So in this year, mayroong pagtatalsik na nangyayari patungo sa mga praile. So in the Philippines, it's actually began earlier in the narrow struggle of the Filipino clergy for justice. Ito ay talagang nagsimula nung mas maaga sa makitid na pakikibaka ng kaparian ng Pilipino para sa hustisya. Isa sa pinakilalang salita ng mas marami pa ang naisulat kaysa kay Jose Rizal ay si Jose Burgos na nagsiwalat na ang diskriminasyon sa lahi ay may pananagutan sa pagsasamantala ng mga Espanyol sa mga Pilipino kabilang ang mga nanumpa na maglingkod sa Diyos. So next we have the secularization of the parishes as the religious movement was called developed into a Filipinization of the parishes movement. So nabuo ang isang kilusang Filipinasyon ng mga parokya, ang secularisasyon ng mga parokya na kung tawagin ang kilusang panrelihiyon. Ito ay nagbibigay diin sa mga Pilipino na nagbigay ng tungkuling pare ng pinakamahalagang sukat sa mga katutubo. The martyrdom of the three priests, Jose Burgos, Jacinto Zamora, and Mariano Gomez, gave Filipinism its first valuable impetus, expressed by no less than Jose Rizal in the introduction of his second novel, El Filibusterismo. And we all know that the Jose Rizal first novel, we have the No Limitangere, I think. And his second novel, we have the El Filibusterismo, which is this responses is related with his novel El Filibusterismo. So, the period from 1872 to 1898 witnessed the transformation of a narrow religious struggle to a national struggle for justice and the consequent enlargement of the Filipino consciousness, important later to the making of Filipino nation before the close of Spanish rule. In the year 1872 to 1892 ay maging saksi ang pagbabago ng isang makitid na pakikibaka sa reliyon tungo sa pambansang pakikibaka para sa katarungan at ang bunga ng paglaki ng kamalayang Pilipino. In this period also, in my understanding, lumitaw ang isang bagong lahi ng mga Pilipino. Like batang idealistiko, walang tiyaga at hindi mapakali. Na walang ibang kundi ang pagnanais na patunayan ang kanilang sarili na mayroon silang higit na angking katalinuhan at kultura gaya ng mga Espanyol. Halimbawa nito sa ngayong henerasyon, may mga iba't ibang uri ng talino ang mga kabataang Pilipino. So, additionally, they entered the school to learn exactly what the colonizers were proud of, the knowledge and art of the Christian religious and many more. Pero yung mga taong batang mga idealistiko, sila rin ay nag-aaral. So to learn exactly what the colonizers were proud of. Consequently, the propaganda movement as the decade characterized produced luminaries such as Gasiana Lopez Haina of Iloilo, Gregorio Santiago and Pedro Paterno of Manila, Jose Rizal of Laguna, Marcelo H. del Pilar of Bulacan, and Jose Maria Panganiban of Bicol. So, ngunit ang kilusang ito ay katulad ng secularisasyon o sekularisasyon dahil hindi ito naghahangad ng kalayaan kundi reforma lamang. So, just like what I said, that hindi sila naghahangad ng kalayaan. Ngunit ang hangad lamang nila ay isang reforma lamang. Next, we have ang reformers ay nais na maging katulad ng mga Kastila para sa kanila ang pamamayanan ang susi sa gayong mga reforma. So sa isang kahulugan, ang realisasyon ay nabibigay sa propagandista ng kanilang tanging ugnayan sa isang kilusan. Isang proseso ng Pilipinas na naghahangad na ibagsak ang kolonyal na kapangyarihan sa pamamagitan ng karahasan, kaya napatuloy ang mga naunang pag-alsa sa Luzon, Visayas at Mindanao. Sa taong 1892, nabuo ng Katipunan bilang sasakyan ang revolusyon ng mga taong mula sa La Liga, Filipina, at ito ay inorganisa ni Jose Rizal na pangunahing nagtaguyod ng kilusang reforma. Si Dr. Jose Rizal, ang ating pambansang bayani, siya ang nagtaguyod ng kilusang reforma. At sa taong 1892, sila ay nakabuo ng Katipunan bilang isang sasakyan ng revolusyon ng mga tao mula sa La Liga, Filipina. So, sa taong ito o sa taong 1892 to 1896, minarkahan ang pagbabago sa mga aktibidad ng Pilipino tungo sa revolusyonaryong pakikibaka at ang tanging ugnayan sa mga pakikibaka ng Muslim at iba pang tribong minorya. Sa makatuwid, ang mga mithiin ng kasarinlan at kalayaan ang nagbubuklod sa mga katutubo o kapuluan. Gayunpaman, nahati o pinaghiwalay sa heograpiya at kultura ng mga ito.
Since the advent of Spanish colonialism, the Muslims had shown by word and deed their opposition to colonial attempts to deprive them of their liberties. Under Raja Sulaiman, they fought the Spanish forces led by Martin de Goite and Miguel Lopez de Legazpi, whose aim was to destroy the Muslim stronghold of Manila and establish there at the center of Spanish rule in the archipelago. Deceived earlier by Spanish participation in the Ancient Blood Compact, the Muslims were defeated and Spain succeeded in guaranteeing her colonial system in 1570 with the founding of municipal government of Manila, the Ayuntamiento. But the Muslims learned the lessons of dealing with colonialism. Their subsequent action was marked by uncompromising battles against Spanish expeditions sent frequently against Muslim bases in Mindanao and Sulu, the two centers of Sultanate. The expeditions culminated in the spring campaigns of Antonio Orbistondo in 1850 and Jose Malacampo in 1876, which destroyed coastal villages in the Sulu archipelago. The Muslim answer to the Spanish bloody campaigns were the retaliatory raids on Christian communities in Visayas and Luzon, especially along the Bicol Peninsula, where the biggest impact of the Moro raids was quite evident. By the beginning of the 19th century, the Muslim strategy had acquired the nature of the jihad, the Islamic method of dealing with an enemy. In fact, the appearance of the Sabilalas or Juramentados, as the Spaniards called them, was an indication of a crisis in the Muslim struggle. The Sabilalas were individual warriors who were set aside by society with appropriate rituals of sanctification and cleansing before dying for the cause. Their only mission was to kill as many of any enemy as possible. Many of them were unleashed in Cotabato and Sulu, causing casualties on the Spaniards, otherwise not possible through the open combat between the Kampilan on one hand and the Gan on the other. In effect, the use of the Sabilala as a means of combat show the defensive trend in Muslim resistance, but the entry of American might against the Spanish power blunted Spanish trust in Moro land. Before the Spanish era, it is known that many Moro communities ruled over Philippines. However, the Spaniards took over the Philippines and initiated the spread of Christianity. So this is the beginning of the Moro struggle. So before they battles against the Spaniards, so they decided to have a deal for peace and unity. So they initiated a blood compact between them and the Spaniards. A blood compact is an ancient ritual wherein they slash their wrist and drink the blood. So it is said to be the seal of their companionship. However, the Spaniards betrayed the Moros. So this led to the Spaniards owning the Manila and made it the capital. So due to the Moros loss, they decided to apply the method of jihad. So they applied new method in confronting the Spaniards. So they battled not because of the Spaniards' betrayal, but their determination to keep and defend their faith as a Muslims. The reaction of the other non-Christians who were not Islamized was to withdraw from the pressures of colonialism. The Cordilleras, where the various ethnic groups, generally called Igorot, found refuge in the hinterlands of the mountain province, was quite inaccessible under normal circumstances. Only in instances where Spanish missions and troops succeeded in penetrating the communities that the response was one of either indifference or outward conformity to colonial presence, which was nominal in character. The revolts or armed struggle of the Igorot at different times in history were efforts to destabilize the colonial extension into areas that were important to them. Those where, for instance, gold mines were found. Consequently, the kind of response the tribal minorities chose to deal with colonial threat worked well to their advantage by making it difficult for Christianity to really take a foothold in their traditions. Although persistent and determined, the religious missions did not achieve the level of success as achieved in lowland communities. Partly, the failure of Spanish colonialism in the periphery of Philippine society was due to the geographic barriers and Spanish preoccupation with lowland communities and Muslim threat. In other words, it was practical for Spanish aims to concentrate attention and efforts the more progressive and developed lowland communities whose potential for colonial purposes could be used to bring the non-Christians in the system. So aside from Muslims, there are other groups or minorities who still uphold ancient belief and traditions of a pre-Hispanic era or pre-Islamic era. It is said that these groups reside on upper areas like mountains. So it is believed that those minorities during the Spanish era revolted and defended their land. So it is for the reason that the land they live hides hundreds of gold. So due to the Spaniards' lack of geographical knowledge in those areas, so it became the advantage of those minorities to avoid being colonized. This because the struggle of Spanish to conquer those lands, so they cannot advance to the upper lands because of the big chance to defeat against the minorities. So that's all for today's discussion. Thank you and God bless.